Matthew and considering how that Matthew writes to highlight the authority of Jesus Christ. Jesus at the end of Matthew would say, "All authority has been given unto me." And Matthew, even in the life of Jesus on this earth, he speaks of Jesus and highlights how that Jesus walked and spoke with great authority. Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7 is the Sermon on the Mount. It has been called the constitution of the kingdom of heaven. Jesus gathered people around him, and they flocked to him, we read at the end of chapter 4, from so many different directions. And he spoke to them, and at the conclusion of his sermon, we read that the people listened to him and were amazed at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one who truly had authority and not as their scribes. The people understood that there was something different about Jesus, that there was a power to what he had to say. There was an innate authority that really cut through and made them want to listen, made them want to pay attention. Jesus begins the Sermon on the Mount with the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the gentle or the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. And Jesus, he takes his hearers on a countercultural ride, a countercultural adventure, to see that God sees things so very differently than what our world sees them, and God evaluates things in such a dramatically different way. And Jesus lays this out for his hearers, especially for his disciples who would take the word after he was crucified, buried, raised, and ascended. He would give it to them that they might understand the plan of God, that it is not according to the vices or to the ways of this world, but that God works upon different principles. Jesus would go on and he would speak about interaction between men and men, women and women. He would talk to them about, you have heard it said about murder, you have heard about it, you have heard the teaching about adultery. And Jesus, he would say, now that is one thing, but I say unto you, and he would ramp up. Murder was not simply a knife plunged into a heart. Adultery was not simply the touching of skin and skin. Murder was anger. Adultery was what took place with the eye even before any clothing was removed. And Jesus would speak to them about how that God sees us. In Matthew chapter 6, Jesus begins by talking about our righteousness. We must be careful not to display our righteousness to be seen of others. And he leads us to the conclusion of that chapter, where he highlights that we are to seek first God's kingdom and his righteousness. And all these other things that people clamor for, they shall be cared for in and of themselves. Jesus was highlighting that God's righteousness is first and foremost, and that should be the passion of our hearts. That should be the movement of our very souls. And then he comes to chapter 7, and he talks about not judging others. Many misunderstand how that this takes place. We are yet to discern. We are yet to be wise. We are not to throw away our heads, but we are to see as God sees, but yet leave the final judgment to God's discernment and to God's court, not to make our own judgments in and of ourselves. Jesus says in chapter 7, ask and it will be given you, seek and you will find, knock and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, to him who seeks finds, and to him who knocks it will be open. Jesus would warn about false prophets, and he would speak that a good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. And he said, You shall know people, you shall know leadership, you shall know all men by the fruit that they bear, the spiritual fruit of their lives. And Jesus comes to a conclusion in the parable of the two men who went to build a house, the one building on the sand, and it collapsed because there was no foundation under it. And so he said, the foolish one who hears my words and does not act upon them will be just like one who builds his house upon the sand. But then he speaks about the wise who digs down and lays a foundation and then builds the house. And how wise and how strong it is. My friend, I encourage you to hear the authority of the Son of God and to build your life upon the rock which is Jesus Christ. He indeed has all authority. Come to him and bow before him and rejoice and delight in him today.
Yes, there's room at the cross for you. Thank you for joining Pastor Barber today. Please watch for Faith to Live By again next Sunday at this same time on this same station. Until then, Faith to Live By prays that the peace of God will fill your heart and that the joy of the Lord will be your strength. Pastor Barber would love to hear from you. The mailing address is Faith to Live By, Box 426, Winnipeg, Manitoba, R3C 2H6.